Now we're going to bring in Cody Cowan. Cody, if you could unmute yourself there with your awesome Austin, Texas background. There you are.
Hi.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I want to say how brilliant. I mean, kudos, Tal. It's so inspiring. I was like tearing up watching it. I mean, sincerely,
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. Such a badass. And anyway, Cody, I'm so happy you're with us. Cody is the executive director, I think is your title, right? I'm sorry, I get lost in titles. So the Red River Cultural District in Austin, Texas. And why don't we start just to give a little context for those who are not familiar with the Cultural District and specifically kind of that sector in Austin. Tell me a little bit about what you do and how you got started and some of the history of your work leading up to this point.
Yeah, thanks. So Austin has a long history with live music. We've had documented performances of large artists all the way back to the 1920s. In particular, in the past 40 years, music has exploded and grown downtown. And the Red River Cultural District exists between 6th and 12th Street downtown. I mean, if you've been to Austin, you probably know where UT is, you know where Barton Springs is, you probably know where Whole Foods is, and you also know where 6th Street and the venues are downtown. It's like, so the Red River Cultural District is that concentration, including about 17 live music venues in this like 6 blocks of downtown Austin. I was born and raised here in Austin and started playing music in like straight edge hardcore bands with friends in the 90s. And then later went on to work at the legendary Emos for about a decade and then ran the Mohawk, which is still on Red River down at 10th and Red River for the past 10 years as GM before developing and pivoting into the role that I'm in right now.
And so Austin has been such a fascinating city, obviously, because it has the reputation, obviously, for live music. And obviously, again, this is a global phenomenon, but certainly for a lot of our audience members who haven't had a chance to spend a lot of time in the States, one of the structural challenges we're having is communities that are sort of identified or thought of as being sort of music centers or hubs of independent music has really helped driven, again, development and sort of pricing and real estate. And there's been kind of this cycle of, thriving live music ecosystems leading to being, kind of priced out and shut down and not being able to sustain because the economic model behind independent music and independent venues really is not meant to work in Lower Manhattan in a time of massive Whole Foodsism or whatever we want to call it. So my sense of your work, Cody, with the Cultural District is kind of growing out of a recognition in Austin that maybe the reality of what's really happening and the trends that were happening over the last number of years may not meet the sort of perception and sort of the hype around what does it mean for Austin to really be thriving as a music city? Is that true? And can you speak to kind of like before the shutdown, kind of what you've been doing the last couple of years to sort of galvanize, support, and advocate on behalf of that district?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I mean, if you're a music fan, you probably heard of Austin, and I mean we somewhat arrogantly took the moniker of the live music capital of the world in the early 90s, much to the locals' laughter. But at the same time, we have an over $2 billion economic impact locally as a music industry. And it has been identified in terms of government and tourism as the largest driving indicator of the rapid growth of Austin for the past 10 years. So, we kind of gravely laugh that we've become victims of our own success. That success has translated to financially to the larger ecosystem for the city, but not to musicians and not to the working class creative culture. I mean, it's kind of an interesting study in socioeconomics and history. Mm-hmm. Live music venues historically have popped up in distressed areas. I mean, you're referencing like New York City. I mean, all uniformly, the venues that you look historically as the rad, badass, cultural, creative centers all grew up in really sketchy parts of town, right? So it's a story of distress and how those low rent and low costs and less, we'll say, more scrappy neighborhoods allowed for live music to occur. I mean, it's not not every neighborhood association is going to be really stoked on live music. But that has pivoted over the course, particularly of the past 40 years, which I think is the most relevant time period to examine, to where, you know, with the new urbanization and growth of modern cities globally, you're seeing the rise of those costs and the challenge of affordability. So even before COVID, we were already in one economic disaster, which was affordability, which is really what created the opportunity for what I'm doing now at the Cultural District. I mean, again, I'll put it into context. In Austin in 2003, when I moved back from San Francisco, I could rent a 1-bedroom and a duplex for $150 a month. Mm-hmm. And now most rent for 1-bedroom are probably going to be closer to $2,000 a month. Exactly. Nothing has changed in terms of wages, right? Yes. So that's a good example of affordability, and certainly that's true for venues. I mean, the Mohawk's rent was probably $10,000 12 years ago, and now it's creeping up on 30. So, you know, you just do quick math there and see what sort of challenges there are economically, and as an industry, how it's been impossible for us to adapt quick enough to meet that in terms of revenue, in terms of licensing, streaming, all of these pieces. For every opportunity that emerges, so does another challenge.
Right. And I think it should be said that one of the interesting things about Austin as sort of an incubator for these policy conversations is that Austin has had previously and has to this day some really smart people working inside the city who understand the complexities of these conversations, that are really trying to help work with you and the rest of the industry to say, how do you puzzle us through together? You know, so it's been, you know, these collaborations that, again, our friend Don Pitts has been behind, that is being continued at the city level by a lot of great people. We're thrilled, again, that Austin is one of the pilot cities in our REVS initiative, and they're really taking the reopening conversation really seriously. The state is engaged. I mean, so there are a lot of players, and I think part of what's really cool about this and about the work that you're doing and your colleagues in Austin is that many cities they're not even engaging in the problem, right? So it's good that at least, you know, there's an effort to say, let's try to get our head around what the dynamics are, why this is important. And then, of course, you've got the unique driver of South by Southwest as just, you know, so important for the economy. And certainly, you know, you take your members out of South by Southwest and it doesn't really exist anymore. I mean, that's it, right? That's the heart of that festival.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, and you and I have been talking for at least a year or two plus at this point. And folks come to you as they come to me, and they're like, how do we have a thriving music city? How do we have this cool thing? I mean, these are all pre-COVID conversations, obviously. Yeah. And inevitably, the finger points back to Austin. It's like, how do we become the golden goose, like down there? And the stark truth is, this was all an accident. It was an accident of history, of being a youth culture center with the University of Texas, of affordable rent and affordable spaces that largely transformed from being DIY spaces into professional venues. And then really largely on the back of the success of South by Southwest. I mean, we wouldn't have a third as many venues as we did in February if it wasn't for that. And we wouldn't have the economy that we did without it. I mean, you know, for instance, venues income is anywhere between 15 to 60% coming from South by Southwest alone. Yeah. So that's like a terrifying dependency, but also shows the vitality and importance of South by, which is like venues is also, you know, a big question mark in terms of survivability and longevity in the future. I mean, a lot of friends who are still working over there and a lot of friends who've had to have been laid off with everyone else. It's a scary time.
So you've put some pretty interesting and provocative and concrete proposals on the table that I want to kind of go through in a little bit of detail. Before we do that, I want to flag, we've got a great question coming in from London from Agent Squires asking if there is a society or organization in Austin focusing on independent promoters. And she flags that the London Promoter Society has about 1,000 grassroots promoters that all are working for the greater good of music. Are you seeing, obviously you've got the venues, you've got city government, are you seeing the promoters in that conversation as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, to that question, So far, we don't see one organization that's kind of an umbrella for all those efforts.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, to your point, there's been at least a 30-year history of advocacy here for music, at least. And I'm probably the third or fourth generation inside of that.
Yeah.
I mean, Don Pence, you mentioned, is one of my mentors and who kind of his work inspired me to get into the game. But those promoters right now are working with us in the Cultural District. They're working with Music Venue Alliance, which I'm sure you've heard for those of you in England. A lot of the work there has inspired us because particularly London has been at the tip of the spear in terms of the affordability challenge and a lot of the negative outcomes that we've seen. We also have Music Makes Austin, which is an umbrella organization that includes MVA, RRCD, South by Southwest, C3, and a bunch of other musicians and promoters, as well as now NEVA. So the promoters are 100% engaged in this. I mean, the cool thing locally is many of us have known each other for 20 or 30 years. We all grew up together. So even if we're a fast-growing city of 2 million, it still feels like small town anywhere. I mean, everyone's communicating. Everyone needs each other for all of it to work.
Right. So I want to turn and we're going to try an experiment in running through a PDF form, which, I mean, my God, we're going from Tao's artistry to looking at PDFs. But,
That's a hard
yeah,
follow.
I know. But Alex, if you could call up this Red River proposal. So one of the things that, Cody, we were really excited by is, how do I say this politically nicely? There's a lot of 10,000-foot rhetoric going around right now about the power of music and the importance of music and yay music cities and go team. And there maybe is not as much as there needs to be from our standpoint, very specific proposals being put on the table that are saying, here's the need, this is what we think could address the need, would you please do this? And you came out with this cultural tourism and live music recommendations, live music economy recommendations a couple weeks ago. And I just think it is so smart. And I also think, and we can talk through this a bit more, and I could be off base on this a little bit, but I also think it's presented in a way that it's not demands, that you're not, saying if you all don't deliver on this, you all don't support music, or, you're not trustworthy partners. Oh, sorry, my computer has an error. I thought that was up on Alex's. I thought we we're getting Zoom bombed again. My sense is the way you present this, I love your take on this, but it's being presented from a sense of partnership and collaboration. But it also is very ambitious and very aggressive. So why don't you start, if you could, by just talk through very quickly, like big picture, what is this document? Like where did this go? Who created it? Like what is the kind of the macro intent of what this thing is?
Yeah. So a quick bit of context. First with the Cultural District, South by Southwest success in downtown Austin created the Cultural District by virtue of so many music venues and other music-facing businesses in terms of economy popping up. So this document really focuses on that because it both is the driver of identity and culture in Austin, as well as economy, right? So there are lots of venues in Austin. Again, only about 17 of those are in the district. Mm-hmm. But this is where the magic happens in terms of economy and in terms of these are the spaces that Tao are playing, right? Where you're seeing a confluence of local scenes, national and international touring, and just vibrant employment and interaction. So and the other part of this is basically was based on a conversation that I entered into in 2014 when I started my advocacy work as GM of Mohawk. This has contributions from Don Pitt, from Bobby Garza, from everyone that I've worked with and known for the past 5 years. Some of this include projects that I've been actively working on at the city for 4 or 5 years that haven't come to fruition. So for myself, this was kind of like a final statement about music economy and the probable outcome of live music. Again, if I want to make a grim setting for this, there's an expected 90% loss of live music venues nationally. NEVA has charted from its 1,600 members, including venues that everyone would know and recognize nationwide. To the earlier point, it's a cost-heavy business, and few people own their land. So the inability to be open and having shows means you can't pay rent, means, here we are 60 days into it. Your likelihood of still being viable, open, or not bankrupt in the next 60 days is low or non-existent unless you have personal wealth or access to that. I mean, your business is in trouble, right? So this is the setting of this. So as the live music capital of the world, I felt it was important now more than ever. And again, I was working on this before COVID, but COVID kind of pushed the timing up to say, here we are, live music of the world. Let's go over what has happened and what's transpired in the past 60 days. And where do you, counsel, and where do you, Austin, stand on wanting this? Because from my point of view, as well as from the perspective of others in NEVA, the live music industry is over, right? So I just want that to sink in, because expectations of returning to February are impossible, not improbable at this point. So what we do, this doesn't mean we're not going to see Tao on a stage 6 months, a year, whenever is appropriate from now. But will there be any stages, right? I mean, we pray to God Tao is there, and she's looking healthy and making rad art. But, those venues and those places are probably not going to be there, particularly without any public funding and a recognition of what music as an industry contributes both to bottom line and to us in terms of our humanity and in terms of our identity. So that's just, I think
I think that framing is critical. And I mean, I know we're not going to give it, let's just do a kind of snapshot overview of some of the recommendations. And then Cody, where does this document live? Is this online where people can find it, or can people email you or me to get a copy of it, or what's best to get this actual document?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I've been intending to put it on the Culture District website. It's not there yet, but if anyone is interested, and again, it's pretty dense stuff, please email you or I'm happy to get it to you.
Great.
But the top level view is there's several ways to help businesses. One of those ways includes a bucket of money, and the other way includes removing barriers, right? So I went down the list, and I wrote this with feedback from many partners in our community in Austin. And I went through what that list looks like based on real, actual costs and needs. And I'm happy to walk through that with you.
Yep. So Alex, why don't you advance to the document, and just Cody, shout out that I really think the preamble is super effective, because you're laying out some real specifics in terms of what is underlying your thinking. So that's some very effective advocacy. All right. So I think we can kind of sort of read this, but again, why don't you just do kind of some snapshots? And there are a couple of extraordinarily provocative ideas here, which are actually not that unrealistic. They just are different thinking in terms of activating them. So let's go through a few.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, we can skip the whereases. I'll just say in short, that's creating a narrative in a legal terminology that shows why these things are needed. So full stop there. And I'll also contextualize the document by saying every market, both in the municipally and state level, is different. Like Texas, in terms of our constitution and what's legally allowed, is much different than other places. So there's pros and cons to every place. But here's what we're dealing with in Texas and in Austin. To the point I made earlier, I'm asking for basically $2 million per month to be allocated from CARES to pay basic costs, particularly rents for venues. What has been indicated globally is that small businesses in developed nations have on average 30 days of operational cushion.
Yeah.
Venues are the first to go and will be the last to show as socially facing businesses, right? To Tao's point, how comfortable is she going to be playing in front of a group of people before a vaccine? I mean, I've heard this said time and time again by musicians here and workers. Not very or not at all is usually the answer.
Yep.
So to keep these spaces able to be reopened at some point, you need this life support, right? You need life support. This next line item is live music fund.
Cody, I'm sorry, just one piece of clarification and then just a time check. We're going to go 10 minutes late. If you have 10, can you go to 2:10 your time?
Yeah, I can push.
Yeah, so let's go for another 12 minutes just because this is critical information. And just a flag for those who are not following CARES. Again, we are hoping and expecting that Congress will be appropriating potentially another $3 trillion. Again, that's, in the negotiations right now. But part of, I think, what you're asking for is, as money is going into shore up state and local budgets, that you would like some of that money to be allocated towards venues.
Correct. So the city of Austin was allocated about 170 million. And of course, the need by everyone far outstrips that amount. Yep. But our proposition is, as the live music capital of the world, quote, if we want to have that economy restart eventually, it has to be still existing. Quickly, we were able to secure funds from hotel occupancy taxes into a bucket that allowed us to ramp up and talk about spending that to subsidize local live music performances. We're like on the edge of getting that there. So we're asking, instead of pilfering this before it's ready, let's use this to reemploy musicians when that time is ready. Similarly, regressive taxes, those costs that disproportionately affect working people and small businesses, like parking, right-of-way fees, and fees for activating on sidewalks, as well as reinvestment fees for, like, say to the point that we'll talk about soon with REVS. If we want to be safe, we got to have clean bathrooms. We got to have clean experiences from point of check-in to bar to stage. This requires additional money. This requires additional investment. These folks don't even have money to pay rent right now. So I was proposing that let's reduce or remove down these fees and costs, knowing that this isn't one of those buckets of money. It's just something that the city already does, and it could be a really easy lift for them, right? Radically proposing for city land purchase trust, this $35 million for the cultural district. If we could receive $35 million and create basically a music development movement, then we can purchase these venues who, already some of them are being shopped by landlords for sale since the market is so scary right now. Then we can retain these things. So I'm basically creating a menu and multiple pronged attack where we're like, how do we keep them alive? How do we retain the land? How do we make it easier when it's safe to reopen? And y'all are probably aware that Texas has already issued reopening. So many businesses are continuing to be reopened. How do we make this environment the safest and easiest to work, short term through long term? Is kind of like the top level view. It's like awesome. Holistic in its vision.
Yeah. So, and I'm sorry, Cody. Is that it for the doc? Is there more?
We looked at homelessness as well. Again, homelessness. Our community is disproportionately affected in terms of homelessness, mental health, and addiction as a music community. Also, downtown in our district are the only existing shelters in Austin. So there's this challenge between us wanting more robust service for those individuals that are experiencing homelessness. We've been advocating for that for years as well. Also understanding that sadly and tragically, the homeless population has largely been forgotten here and everywhere inside a pandemic. I mean, it's shocking and I don't know what else to say. It's shocking.
Yeah. So where does this document go? So Alex, why don't you turn off that, and thank you so much for running through. Oh, good one. Got some good questions coming in too. So the document is sent. Where does the document go?
So I shared this with Austin City Council, as I knew that CARES money was up for allocation and debate, and thus far we hadn't found an avenue forward that would allow us to get in the bread line, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So I shared this with council. This was taken up by council and press here. We got 2 resolutions that came out of the mayor's office and council member Tovo's office. She, of course, is the representative of the district one of the representatives of the district that the cultural district lives in. And we've had essentially all of these items in general adopted into resolution as of yesterday. So that's good news. This is spiritually the biggest victory we've had in music advocacy in Austin in the history of music advocacy. Now, that's different than a check for $35 million and getting the CARES money. So we haven't gotten the results yet. So that's why I'm not popping champagne bottles yet or, patting folks on the back.
So is this essentially, this is a conceptual agreement that they are in line with your values if the resources are available to try to put all the pieces together? Is that how you would think about it?
It's that, in the addition of directing the city manager and city staff to go and explore this, and in particular cases, make it so.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the larger ticket items are more of an exploration, with $35 million and this ask of $2 million per month for the venue ecosystem. But nevertheless, if you're not in the bread line, then you're not going to get bread. So whether that means it's this allocation of the CRF or the next one that will be coming from the federal government. I mean, at the end of the day, we're talking about federal dollars. I mean, local municipalities can't keep up with housing insecurity and food insecurity. So here we are.
Yeah, and this has been, I think, one of the, I mean, I hate that this has had to be crisis driven. You know, unfortunately, most advocacy is crisis driven. But I think one of the most interesting developments over the last couple of months is the potential to have the national venue infrastructure then tied into what have been basically locally driven organic mobilizations like the Chicago Independent Venue League and the work that you've been doing in Austin and the work, again, we've talked a lot about the success in King County with the Seattle area venues coming together and getting a commitment of public dollars from King County just to be matched by philanthropy. So, you know, it's really interesting because, again, you know, the ultimate challenge that we always talk about is, I mean, if the next phase of the CARES bill goes through, you know, what we're talking about, like $8 trillion are going to be invested of federal money, you know, this year. And of course, the money, it always goes to the people who are organized and who know how to get the money and who, you know, have their act together. And the only way you can do that by definition is by having the ability to organize these interest groups, basically, you know, to say we have a common agenda. We have problems that are important to policymakers at all levels. These can be fixed through resources or through policy, or they can be addressed, you know, not fixed, but they can be mitigated. And this is how we're going to do it. And so this, you know, long-term potential of these, you know, the local organizing linking up to the national policy networks to then make more concrete asks that don't necessarily have to be coming out of crisis, but coming out of a fundamental rethinking about these cultural structures, you know, gives me encouragement long-term, you know, so that's, and again, I keep repeating this, but this is, you know, this is why you've done this work for a long time. This is why we've done this work. I mean, we've done this work to try to help create the infrastructure to address these structural challenges. And so it's very natural for us then to pivot in and say, okay, you know, what are the realities of today? How do we address someone who needs to be in that conversation? What can be done? Again, not at the philosophical, romantic, isn't music great level, but at like literally how are we going to make this shit happen? So it's
absolutely.
We're definitely getting questions about the doc. And I'm going to ask Alex, I don't even know if Zoom allows a PDF to be linked. So why don't you play with that, Alex, and see if it's possible to do that, but I would encourage people who want a copy of the formal document, just email me at musicpolicyforum@gmail.com, and I'll be sure to get it right out to you. And Cody, your information, I think, is on your website if people want to ping Cody directly.
Correct. Thank you.
Yep. Awesome. Well, we could have gone for a lot longer, but I really, Cody, obviously, we all really appreciate your work and appreciate, again, the leadership of the whole community in Austin as an incubator of all the structural policy work that we all are trying to do. And I know you couldn't be successful if you didn't have excellent collaborators who are willing to engage with this work and be thought partners with you and really try to, again, engage in the problem solving piece. So I know I'm going to end with a dumb question that I don't really want to know the answer to, but it sounds like this weekend may be a little complicated down there. What are you anticipating just in terms of the messaging around reopening and the mechanics of what may be happening in Texas and specifically in Austin? Do you have a sense of what this might look like?
Providing a short answer is difficult, but I'll say that the big picture, I'd say the majority of live music venues are going to wait and see. But again, the business model, 25% of reopening is still 100% of nothing. I mean, you can't make rent off of 25%. You can't make rent and payroll off of 50%. Yeah. So I think by virtue of that, which is kind of behind the CARES ask, The majority of venues will stay closed. Those that have more robust, or we'll say, their business model isn't supported directly by music, it's part of their business model, like restaurants and bars who provide live music experiences. I think we're going to see a lot of those popping back up, and the rest of us as an ecosystem, the community, is understanding because everyone's desperate to survive right now, quite frankly. Yeah. But we're all waiting to see what the consequences and outcomes from that will be. I mean, again, until Tao is comfortable touring again, the idea of live music venues going online again in the way that we know and love them and experience those shows, it's not going to happen. And I support that decision.
Yeah, Cody, that's a great way to kind of wrap this. I think, again, congratulations and thank you for your work and thank you for spending time with us today. And next week's our Music Cities Together live program next week is going to dig into another piece of this, which is we're actually welcoming our friends from Music Canada who are going to be walking through some very sobering polling data that they've been putting out in terms of public attitudes towards moving back to live music and what audiences expect to see and need to see before they're willing to come back. So again, that's the other leg of the stool that we keep talking about with REVS, is how are we not only doing the best job possible around the safety and around the security issues and the public health piece of this, but then also like who needs to know those messages, who needs to know what's happening. So Cody, thank you. Alex Dolvin crushed it again. There's a temporary link to the document that he created, a quick Dropbox, but then if you can't grab that fast enough, or if you're watching our archive, again, just email me at musicpolicyforum@gmail.com and we'll make sure you have the document. I know, Cody, we'll be doing all sorts of Zooms in the future with you in other cities, collaborating, strategizing, and brainstorming about how to take some of these concepts and take them to other cities and vice versa. So I know you're excited about that, and I know that we're all exhausted from Zooms, but we will be looking forward to doing as much of that as we can handle. So with that, again, thanks to Alex, thanks to our partners at Music Cities Together, thanks to all of you for participating in the show and the great feedback, and we'll see you next Friday. Thanks.
Thank you.